The morning sun, usually a comforting glow, felt like a harsh spotlight. At 72, I had seen my share of storms, but nothing prepared me for the tempest brewing across my own kitchen island. My son David, a man I'd raised with every fiber of my being, stood before me, his face a grotesque mask of fury. "Move out! We're not a charity, you old hag," he bellowed, his voice echoing the shattering of something far more fragile than glass. My pill bottle, a lifeline, lay scattered on the cold tile, a brutal testament to his rage. As I slowly, silently sank to my knees to retrieve it, a chilling thought settled in. This wasn't just an argument. This was the moment everything changed. A betrayal so profound it would ripple through our lives, pulling at the very foundations we thought unshakable. What happened next would redefine family, justice, and the quiet power of a woman pushed too far. The air in the kitchen crackled with an electricity that had nothing to do with the humming refrigerator. It was the volatile energy of years of unspoken resentment finally erupting, a festering wound tearing wide open. I, a woman who had weathered widowhood, raised a son alone, and scrimped every penny to ensure he had opportunities I never did, felt my very essence being stripped away. My hand, aged and faintly trembling, reached for the fallen pill bottle, its bright orange a stark contrast to the dull, aching void growing in my chest. Each white pill, scattered like discarded dreams, represented not just my heart medication, but the fragile remnants of my dignity. An old, useless hag like you should be ready to rot in the ground. David's voice, raw and laced with venom, sliced through the morning silence. It was the same voice that, as a small boy, had begged for one more bedtime story. The same voice that had called out, "Mummy," when he'd scraped his knee. Now it was a weapon, wielded by the very child I had once shielded from every pain. His face was a mask of contorted rage, red with fury, veins throbbing at his temples. His fists, clenching and unclenching at his sides, looked ready to strike. I remembered those small, chubby hands grasping mine tightly as we crossed the street, learning to ride a bike. The stark contrast was a cruel twist of the knife in my heart. Sarah, David's wife, hovered somewhere nearby, a silent, complicit shadow. She always was. I could almost hear her feigned busyness, the clinking of dishes in the sink, the rustle of a newspaper, pretending not to hear, pretending not to see, just as she had pretended for years that my quiet sacrifices, my unsolicited help with childcare, my discreet financial contributions, were not the threads holding their increasingly fragile life together. Sarah was a master of passive aggression, a silent conductor to David's overt hostility. I had seen the subtle eye rolls, the barely perceptible sighs, the way Sarah would tighten her grip on David's arm whenever I offered an opinion, as if to physically restrain him from any kindness towards his own mother. I stood motionless, rooted to the spot. Not from fear, though a cold tremor did begin to creep up my left arm, a familiar precursor to the ache that signaled I had missed my heart medication. No, this stillness was born of a deeper, more profound shock. It was the shock of seeing my own flesh and blood, a person I had loved unconditionally, display such utter contempt. The words, "Stop bleeding me dry, you leech," resonated in the air, hanging heavy and suffocating. A leech. Me. The woman who had given up her own dreams, her own comforts, to provide for him. The woman who had worked 2 jobs after my husband passed, just to keep a roof over his head and food on the table, sacrificing my youth and my peace of mind. A memory, sharp and unbidden, pierced through the haze of pain. It was David as a small boy, feverish and vulnerable, his forehead damp with sweat. I, exhausted from a night shift, had sat by his bed, pressing a cool, damp rag soaked in vinegar to his brow, whispering lullabies until the fever broke. I remembered the gentle touch, the desperate prayers, the overwhelming love that had consumed me. Now, standing across the island, where I had once packed his school lunches, where I had wiped away his tears and celebrated his small victories, that same face was twisted into something unrecognizable, red with fury, spitting venom. The injustice of it all was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I stared at the pill bottle partially hidden beneath the edge of the refrigerator, a few white pills scattered like teeth knocked from a mouth. Each one represented a beat of my ailing heart, a day I fought to keep going. David had thrown it, a gesture of pure, unadulterated contempt for my very existence. He didn't care that these pills kept me alive, that they regulated the very organ that had swelled with unconditional love for him. To him, I was just a burden, a drain, an obstacle to his perceived freedom. Slowly, painstakingly, I lowered myself to my knees. It was a painful process. My joints, stiff with age and years of labor, creaked in protest. One hand braced against the cold countertop, a small anchor in a suddenly tumultuous world. It hurt, but I did it silently. No groan, no whimper, just a profound, aching silence. My son said nothing either. He had already turned his back, storming off to the living room, presumably to brood or to complain to Sarah, who remained conspicuously absent from the immediate scene of the crime. His back, broad and unyielding, was a brick wall, blocking out any possibility of remorse or understanding. As my fingers finally closed around the cool plastic of the bottle, so familiar in my palm, another memory came flooding back, the kind that rises without permission and floods the senses. David, maybe 5 years old, learning to ride his bicycle without training wheels. He had fallen, skinned his knee, and cried tears of frustration and pain. I had scooped him up, kissed the scrape, and whispered words of encouragement. "You're strong, my boy. You can do anything." I had believed those words then, instilled them in him. Now, faced with his cruelty, I wondered if I had instilled the wrong kind of strength, a strength devoid of empathy, hardened by self-interest. The silence that followed his outburst was deafening, more cutting than any scream. It was the silence of a bond severed, of a heart irrevocably broken, and of a promise I was about to make to myself, a promise that would change everything. The silence in the kitchen, once deafening, now hummed with a strange, almost electric tension. I, still on my knees, the small orange pill bottle clutched in my trembling hand, felt a profound shift within me. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. The tears that had threatened to fall, the grief that had clawed at my throat, solidified into something cold and resolute. For years, I had been the silent, suffering matriarch, absorbing every slight, every dismissive glance, every cruel word with a quiet dignity I now recognized as a form of self-erasure. No more. The broken pills on the floor, the venom in David's voice, the complicit silence of Sarah. It was a crucible, forging a new me. The woman who had given everything, who had been called a leech, was about to reclaim her life, piece by painful piece. I pushed myself up slowly, deliberately. Every joint protested, every muscle ached, but my spine, usually bowed by years of unspoken burdens, felt remarkably straight. David hadn't even looked back. He was probably already in the living room, rehearsing his grievances to Sarah, painting me as the villain, the eternal burden. Let him. My eyes, once clouded with sadness, held a flicker of something new, a steely resolve. I walked past the remnants of the morning's argument, past the scattered pills I'd managed to gather, and into the small, cluttered study that had once been my late husband's sanctuary. It was here, in a fireproof safe, hidden behind a dusty bookshelf, that the true weight of my power lay. With practiced movements, I retrieved the combination, digits etched into my memory not just as numbers, but as years of sacrifice and foresight. The click of the tumblers echoed loudly in the stillness of the house. Inside, nestled amongst old financial documents and my wedding album, was the crisp, official deed to this house, the house David now considered his, the house he thought I had no right to. Oh, how wrong he was. I had bought this house, paid for it, maintained it, long before David had even thought of college, much less marriage. It was my haven, my legacy, before it became his perceived inheritance. I folded the deed carefully, slipping it into the inner pocket of my worn handbag. My only other possession of significant value, a small velvet pouch containing my late husband's watch and a few heirloom pieces of jewelry joined it. No suitcase, no emotional farewells, just the essentials. By breakfast, I was gone. The words uttered in a calm, almost detached voice as I spoke to the new real estate agent later that morning held a chilling finality. Yes, the sale can proceed. The paperwork is all in order. I had already contacted the agent weeks ago, planting the seeds for this very day. It wasn't a snap decision born of rage. It was a carefully calculated move, the culmination of years of quiet planning, fueled by the slow, painful realization that my son saw me not as a mother, but as a liability. The thought of David and Sarah waking up to my absence filled me not with malice, but with a strange, bittersweet satisfaction. They would assume I'd gone to a friend's, perhaps, or even worse, that I had finally collapsed under the weight of my perceived uselessness. They would be wrong, so profoundly wrong. The silence that followed my departure from the house was thick with absence. David, emerging from his self-righteous indignation, probably expected me to be in the kitchen, silently cleaning up the mess he'd made, perhaps preparing an apology. He would have found an empty, pristine space, the discarded pill bottle the only testament to the morning's violence. Sarah, always cautious, might have been the first to notice. A missing jacket. The absence of my familiar slippers by the back door. Small details, accumulating into a gaping hole. The first calls began around lunchtime. My phone, usually a quiet companion, buzzed with frantic desperation. David's name flashed across the screen, then Sarah's. I let them ring, observing the insistent vibrations, the escalating panic in the callers' names. I was miles away now, driving down a quiet country road, the Georgia landscape blurring into shades of green and gold. Each mile was a physical release, a shedding of the emotional baggage I had carried for far too long. I had made a reservation at a small, unassuming motel, just far enough away to afford anonymity, just close enough to feel like a calculated retreat, not a panicked flight. By dinner, the roof over their heads was gone too. I imagined the scene. David, probably exasperated, perhaps even annoyed, finally calling the utility companies, looking for me. Then the inevitable, the call from the real estate agent, calm and professional, informing him that the property had been sold, that I had full legal rights, that I had been the sole owner, and that the new owners would be taking possession within the next 48 hours. The realization would hit him like a physical blow. The secure, comfortable life he had taken for granted, the life his mother had provided, was dissolving beneath his very feet. When David's call finally came through, it was no longer tinged with annoyance, but with raw panic. "Mom, what have you done?" His voice, usually so confident, so dismissive, was now laced with an almost childish desperation. "Where are you? What's going on with the house?" I listened, allowing his frantic questions to wash over me. I pictured him, pacing, running a hand through his hair, the mask of self-importance finally cracking. And then clearly, my voice steady and surprisingly strong, I delivered the words I had rehearsed 1,000 times in my mind. "You made your choices, David, and I made mine." The line went silent for a long moment, stretched thin by the weight of unsaid things, of years of unspoken hurt finally finding its voice. I didn't wait for his reply, for the torrent of anger or pleas that would surely follow. I simply hung up. The click of the phone echoed in the quiet motel room, a small, definitive sound that sealed a new chapter. For the first time in decades, I felt truly, undeniably free. The burden of David's expectations, of Sarah's silent judgments, of my own self-sacrifice had been lifted. The house, once a cage of resentment, was now a tool, a means to an end, my end. A new beginning. The initial confusion and panic David and Sarah would be experiencing was just the beginning of their reckoning, and I, for once, was not there to pick up the pieces. I was busy collecting my own. I settled into my new rhythm, a quiet life unfolding amidst the blossoming petunias and the burgeoning tomato plants in my small rented backyard. Each morning, as I drank my warm coffee barefoot in my own kitchen, I felt the subtle shift, the deep-seated peace that now resided within me. It was a stark contrast to the life I had just exited, a life where every gesture, every word, every moment felt weighed down by the unspoken expectations and the suffocating resentment from David and Sarah. Here there was only the gentle hum of my own choosing, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the knowledge that I was finally living for myself. Meanwhile, the whirlwind of legalities and hushed whispers had indeed engulfed David and Sarah. The initial panic, the frantic calls, had given way to a grim, desperate scramble. I imagined David, his usual arrogance replaced by a haggard desperation, pleading with landlords, facing credit checks he likely couldn't pass without my financial backing, and the cold, hard refusal from banks he once took for granted. He who had always assumed he was entitled to everything was now learning the brutal lesson of self-sufficiency. He had once roared about me being a leech, sucking him dry. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I had been the unseen support, the quiet cushion that had absorbed every financial misstep, every impulsive purchase, every period of unemployment he had conveniently forgotten. He had taken my steadfast presence, my willingness to sacrifice, for granted. He had confused my unconditional love with an endless, obligation-free resource. Now, that resource was gone. The bills, once magically handled, were now piling up. The comfortable, spacious home, once his perceived inheritance, was now occupied by strangers. He was forced to confront the chilling reality. I was never a parasite. I was the foundation. And when I left, the whole house fell. I learned through my old friend Margaret, who still lived in their former town, just how profound that fall had been. Margaret, ever discreet but concerned, would call occasionally, her voice softening as she recounted the local gossip. David had been forced to move into a cramped, overpriced apartment far from the affluent neighborhood he believed he belonged in. Sarah, who had always maintained a polished, unbothered exterior, was now seen haggard, her designer clothes replaced by more modest attire. Her usual air of superiority vanished. The social circles they once moved in had subtly, almost imperceptibly distanced themselves. People remembered me. They remembered my quiet kindness, my volunteer work, my steadfast presence. They remembered how David had flaunted his success while I lived modestly, always putting him first. The community, it seemed, had a long memory and a silent collective judgment. David, who had once prided himself on his self-made image, was now utterly exposed. The illusion of his independence, so carefully constructed, shattered. He had lost not just a house, but his status, his comfort, and perhaps most importantly, the psychological safety net that his mother had always provided. He must have been forced to humble himself, to seek help from others, to face the reality that he was not as self-sufficient as he had always claimed. And for me, there was a quiet triumph in this. Not a vengeful joy, but a deep satisfaction in the knowledge that truth, however painful, had a way of asserting itself. The transformation in me was profound. I no longer felt the invisible chains of obligation. My shoulders, once hunched from the weight of unspoken burdens, were straighter. My eyes, which had often held a hint of sadness, now sparkled with a newfound vitality. I joined a local book club, started taking pottery classes at the community center, and rediscovered a joy for painting that I had abandoned decades ago. My days were filled with quiet purpose, with laughter that felt genuine, and with connections that were built on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. I never called David. He never called me back after that initial panicked outburst. The silence between us was complete, a vast, echoing chasm. And for me, it was not a void, but a space for me to breathe, to grow, to simply be. I often sat in my garden watching the butterflies flit among my tomato plants and reflected on the journey, It had been agonizingly painful, the betrayal a wound that might never fully heal. But from that wound, something beautiful had emerged, the truth of my own resilience. I wasn't just a mother, a grandmother, a caretaker. I was a woman with my own desires, my own dreams, my own unwavering strength. I had spent a lifetime pouring myself into others, believing that was my sole purpose. But the cruel lesson from David had forced me to look inward, to reclaim the parts of myself I had sacrificed. I was a testament to the quiet power of a woman who finally chose herself. I had given David the most profound gift a parent can give, the opportunity to truly grow up, to face the consequences of his actions, to learn the hard lessons of humility and self-reliance. And while he might never acknowledge it, that was the ultimate act of love, however painful for them both. My garden flourished under the gentle Georgia sun, a testament to nurturing and resilience. Each ripe tomato I plucked from the vine was a small victory, a symbol of the life I had cultivated from the ashes of betrayal. I had found my rhythm, a quiet symphony of self-care and newly discovered passions. The laughter I shared with my book club friends, the satisfying feel of clay shaping beneath my hands in pottery class, the vibrant colors emerging on my canvas. These were the hues of a life truly lived, far removed from the muted tones of my past. I was a woman reborn, not despite my age, but perhaps because of it. 72 had become not an end, but a powerful, liberating beginning. Yet, even in my newfound tranquility, the echoes of my story and the stories of countless others like me resonated deeply. I knew my journey wasn't just about me. It was a testament to the quiet strength of women everywhere, the unspoken battles fought, the tireless sacrifices made, often in the shadows. The original version of my story, shared for others to hear, had become a beacon, drawing in listeners who recognized a piece of themselves, their mothers, or their grandmothers in my ordeal. Thank you for listening to my story. I often found myself thinking, an unvoiced message to the anonymous audience who had embraced my truth. My story, though initially born of pain, had transformed into a powerful narrative of empowerment. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of a mother, a grandmother, or maybe even yourself, then know this: you are not alone. Our stories matter, even when they've been silenced for years, especially then. This was the core message that pulsed at the heart of telling these stories. It was a belief that wisdom often whispers, that justice doesn't always shout, and that the most profound truths are often told late, but told loud. It was a space where the voices of quiet warriors, forgotten caretakers, and mothers who were never just mothers could finally be heard. I, now a quiet advocate, understood the immense power of this collective voice. We remember everything they thought we'd forget, every sacrifice, every slight, every moment of unwavering love that was brushed aside. This sharing was more than just a collection of narratives. It was a community. Listeners wrote in, sharing their own similar experiences, finding solace and validation in the shared human experience of resilience in the face of adversity. I received letters, emails, even small tokens of appreciation from strangers whose lives had been touched by my raw honesty. I read about daughters reconciling with estranged mothers, about individuals finding the courage to set boundaries with demanding family members, about elders choosing to live their golden years on their own terms, free from the burdens of ungrateful dependence. My story, a seed of suffering, had blossomed into a forest of shared understanding and renewed hope. Thought of David, I wondered if, amidst his financial struggles and the cold comfort of his pride, a flicker of memory ever surfaced. Perhaps a faint echo of the mornings I made his favorite banana bread, filling the kitchen with warmth and sweetness. Or the nights I sat by the window long after he was supposed to be home, waiting for his headlights to pull into the driveway safely. My heart a fragile knot of worry until I heard his footsteps on the porch. Maybe he would remember. Or maybe he would not. Either way, it was no longer my burden to carry. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. The quiet resolve within me was stronger than any lingering resentment. My journey, chronicled for the world, stood as a testament. I had been called a leech, but today I lived truly and fully, my days marked not by struggle, but by self-determination. And David? He just had rent due every month. The simple truth of that reality was more powerful than any spoken accusation. This movement, this celebration of the untold narratives, this defiant act of remembrance was just getting started. Because when a grandma speaks, when the wisdom of age and lived experience finally finds its voice, the world finally listens. And I, the woman who had lost everything only to gain myself, was living proof that some stories, though whispered for years, have the loudest echoes when finally told out loud. My existence was my message, strong, independent, and free.